Dad threw me out at 13 because stepmom hated me. Now he wants me back. People were asking why his own daughter would feel the need to leave, questioning what was going on in that house. I could tell from the tone of his later messages that he was panicking. He didn't know what to say to everyone. My grandparents were especially mad because he didn't tell them the full story. They didn't know about Laura wanting me gone or what my dad had said to me. They just thought I'd disappeared. So when they found out what actually went down, it got real ugly. David and Laura ended up going door to door to family friends' houses, asking if anyone had seen me. It was almost embarrassing how desperate they sounded in some of the texts, like they were trying to play the victims, now that they had a whole bunch of people questioning them. But I knew better. They weren't upset because I left. They were upset because everyone else knew about it now. The guilt trip didn't work on me. The more I read through their messages, the more I realized I wasn't just mad. I was done. There was no going back. I couldn't unhear the things my dad had said, and Laura clearly didn't want me around. I'd been trying so hard to make things better, to help out and keep the peace, but it was obvious that nothing I did was ever going to be good enough. They didn't want me there, and I wasn't about to beg for their approval anymore. My aunt could tell I was in a bad place that day, but she didn't push me to talk about it. She just let me have space, which was exactly what I needed. Later that evening, she did come into my room and ask if I wanted to stay with her for a while. I didn't even hesitate. Of course I did. Going back to my dad's house was out of the question, and I didn't want to bounce around between friends' houses. Staying with Maggie felt safe. It was my escape from the craziness. The rest of that day was a blur. I spent most of it on my phone, reading all the comments under my dad's post, seeing how people were reacting. There were a few people trying to defend him, saying maybe I was just a difficult teenager, or that the pandemic was making things harder for everyone. But most people were on my side, asking why a 13-year-old would feel like she needed to leave in the first place. Even distant relatives were chiming in, saying how disappointed they were in my dad for letting things get this bad. As much as I appreciated the support, part of me was still hurting. No matter how many people called him out, it didn't change the fact that my own dad had chosen Laura over me. He'd made it clear where his priorities were, and I wasn't one of them. I tried not to think about it too much, but it stuck with me, and every time I checked my phone, the hurt just came back stronger. That night, before I went to bed, I finally texted my dad back. It wasn't a long message, just something to let him know I was safe and that I wouldn't be coming back. I told him I'd be staying with Maggie for a while and that I didn't want to talk to him until I was ready. His response came almost instantly, but I didn't bother reading it. I'd had enough for one day. As I lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized that things were never going to be the same. Not with my dad, not with Laura. And for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. After a few days at my Aunt Maggie's house, things started to feel a little more normal, or at least as normal as they could be after everything that had happened. I was still getting constant texts from my dad, but I wasn't really reading them. I knew what he wanted to say, and honestly, I wasn't ready to hear it. He kept sending messages like, "We need to talk," or "Let's work this out." But he never actually apologized for what he said to me that night. It was all about Laura and how I needed to understand her situation and be more patient. It felt like he was still choosing her over me, even after I had made it clear I wasn't coming back. At some point, I decided to block both him and Laura on my phone. I was tired of the guilt trips and tired of feeling like I was the one who had done something wrong. It wasn't my responsibility to fix the situation, and I wasn't going to let them keep dragging me into their mess. My Aunt Maggie was a lifesaver during all of this. She didn't push me to talk about what had happened unless I wanted to. She just made sure I had a safe space to breathe and figure things out. She even set up her guest room for me like it was my own space, with my favorite blankets and snacks, so I felt comfortable. It was nice having someone who genuinely cared about how I was feeling without any hidden agenda. One day, while we were sitting at the kitchen table, Maggie finally asked me, "Do you think you'll ever talk to your dad again?" She wasn't being pushy. It was more like she was giving me a chance to talk about how I was really feeling. I didn't answer right away because honestly, I didn't know how to answer. Part of me wanted to believe that my dad could fix things, that he could somehow make it right. But the other part of me, the part that had heard him say those horrible things, didn't think it was possible. How do you move past something like that? "I don't know," I finally said. "I want to talk to him, but I don't think I can forgive him. Not after what he said." Maggie nodded. "That's fair. You don't have to decide anything right now. Take your time." That's what I needed to hear. I didn't need a solution right away. I just needed space to figure it out. Meanwhile, my grandparents were still furious with my dad. I didn't even have to say anything to them about what happened. They had already put the pieces together from my dad's social media posts and some conversations with other family members. They had stopped talking to him altogether, which honestly surprised me. I figured they'd be mad, but I didn't expect them to cut him off like that. I guess it showed me that I wasn't the only one who thought he was in the wrong. Every few days, my grandma would call me to check in. She never brought up my dad, and I appreciated that. She mostly asked how I was doing, how things were at Maggie's, and if I needed anything. I think she was trying to make up for the fact that things had gone so sideways, even though none of it was her fault. It was comforting to know that at least someone in the family had my back. Life at Maggie's was way more relaxed than it had ever been at my dad's house. There was no tension, no walking on eggshells. I actually felt like I could breathe again. I spent my days doing online school, thanks, pandemic, and helping Maggie around the house. It wasn't exciting, but after months of feeling like I was in constant fight or flight mode, it was exactly what I needed. The thing was, though, even with all the support from my aunt and grandparents, I still felt this gnawing emptiness inside. I mean, yeah, I was glad to be out of my dad's house, but I couldn't help but think about my half-brother. I hadn't met him yet, and part of me worried that by staying away from my dad and Laura, I'd never get the chance. He was innocent in all of this, and it didn't feel fair that I might lose out on being his sister because of everything that happened between me and my dad. I tried not to dwell on it, but it was hard. Every time I thought about my future, I wondered if my brother would be in it. But at the same time, I knew that going back to my dad's house, even just to see him, wasn't an option. Not yet. I wasn't ready to face them, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. One night, while I was scrolling through my phone, I saw a notification from my dad's social media. He had posted a long, drawn-out message about family and how he regretted how things had gone with me. It was clearly aimed at me, even though he didn't mention my name. He wrote about how he wanted to make amends and bring the family back together. Reading it made me angry all over again. He was acting like posting online was the same as apologizing to me directly, like putting up a vague, guilt-trippy message was supposed to fix everything.